I spent decades building my theory. It was my life's work. Every equation, every concept felt like a piece of me. My unified field theory was almost complete, a universe in my mind. I saw the patterns, the connections, the elegant simplicity of it all. This was my magnum opus, ready for the world. I felt a quiet pride, a deep satisfaction in this solitary pursuit. Adrian Thorne was my star student. He was brilliant, eager, with a mind like a sponge. I saw myself in him, a younger, hungrier version. I mentored him closely, sharing insights, guiding his research. He was more than a student to me. He was like a son, a true intellectual heir. I trusted him completely, perhaps too much. I began to share the core of my theory with Adrian, not just the published parts, but the unpublished proofs, the raw, unpolished ideas. These were my most vulnerable thoughts, the culmination of my life's work. I wanted him to understand, to carry the torch forward. I believed he would protect it, cherish it as I did. We spent countless hours in my office, often late into the night. I laid out the intricate framework, the subtle nuances, the very heart of the theory. He listened intently, asking sharp questions, absorbing every detail. I felt a rare camaraderie, a shared passion for discovery. I held nothing back, showing him every secret, every breakthrough. Then came the email. A notification from Nature Physics. Adrian Thorne, a groundbreaking paper, my unified field theory presented as his own. The title, the abstract, the very words were undeniably mine. My blood ran cold, the world tilted. This was impossible. It had to be a mistake, a terrible misunderstanding. Disbelief quickly turned to a gut-wrenching shock. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the image of my trusting student with this blatant theft. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just my work, it was my legacy, my identity stolen by someone I had nurtured. The pain was sharp, profound, and sickening. I soon realized Adrian had been meticulously planning this. He had subtly referenced my unpublished ideas in his earlier minor papers, laying groundwork. He had secured preliminary grants, building a false narrative of independent discovery. He had been setting a trap, a cunning, elaborate one. And I, blind with trust, had walked right into it. I tried to reach him. Calls, emails, messages, all met with silence, then cold deflection. His assistant claimed he was unavailable, too busy. When I finally cornered him in the hall, his eyes were devoid of warmth. He feigned ignorance, then annoyance. "Professor Vance, I'm not sure what you're talking about." His voice was flat, emotionless, a stranger's. Days later, the official announcement came. Adrian Thorne's revolutionary unified field theory, hailed as a Nobel-level discovery. The media buzzed with his name. Funding offers poured in. He was the new wonderkind. My decades of work, my quiet sacrifices were now his triumph. The injustice burned, a cold fire in my gut. I immediately contacted department heads, journal editors, old colleagues. I showed them my notebooks, my dated drafts, my emails. They listened, but their eyes held skepticism. Adrian's credibility was already established. My claims sounded like sour grapes. I was a respected yet quiet academic. He was the rising star. I was alone, professionally ruined. Yet as I sat in my silent office, a cold resolve settled in my bones. This wasn't just theft, this was war, and I knew exactly how to fight. I filed my formal complaints. The university, the journals, everyone. I laid out my evidence, my dated notes, my emails. The responses were polite, firm, insufficient evidence. Adrian's work stands. They sided with the rising star, not the quiet veteran. It was a calculated dismissal designed to shut me down. I felt the first cold sting of an establishment closing ranks. Adrian's public statements were insidious. He spoke of misunderstandings and unfortunate envy. His allies, subtle at first, echoed the sentiment. They framed me as a bitter old mentor, unable to accept a student's success. The whispers started, turning my name into a synonym for professional jealousy. It was a well-orchestrated smear campaign designed to isolate me. The university moved swiftly. My tenure review was postponed indefinitely. Research funding dried up, grant applications rejected without explanation. My name was quietly removed from project lists. My reputation, once solid, was now a shadow. I was being systematically erased, piece by piece. The silence from former colleagues was deafening. I attended the annual physics conference, a place I once thrived. This time I was a pariah. Conversations stopped when I approached. Eyes glanced away. Adrian, from the main stage, accepted an innovation award, his smile brilliant. The applause was thunderous. I stood at the back, a ghost in my own world, enduring the public spectacle of my stolen legacy. The isolation was a heavy cloak. Self-doubt gnawed at me. Had I been too trusting, too naive? Hours blurred into days as I replayed every conversation, every shared moment with Adrian. The weight of it all was crushing, a constant pressure on my mind. I fought to keep my thoughts clear, to not let the despair consume me. Adrian's star continued to rise. He received prestigious awards, secured massive multi-year grants. His research group expanded. A powerful empire built on my stolen foundations. He became the new face of theoretical physics, a media darling. Every headline, every interview was a fresh wound, a reminder of his ruthless ambition and my profound loss. There were moments, dark ones, when I considered walking away, leaving academia, abandoning the fight. The thought of a quiet life, free from this constant torment, was tempting. But then the image of Adrian's triumphant smile would flash in my mind, and the urge to surrender would vanish, replaced by a cold, steady resolve. An old colleague, Professor Davies, approached me in the university cafeteria. His voice was low, laced with pity. "Elias, for your own good, let it go. You're only hurting yourself." He spoke of Adrian's proof and the consensus. It was clear Adrian's narrative had taken root, even among those I once considered friends. Their concern was a subtle form of gaslighting. I spent weeks sifting through old files, dusty boxes, forgotten hard drives. Every email, every draft, every scribbled note. I needed something undeniable, something they couldn't dismiss. My office became a war room of paper and data, a desperate attempt to unearth the smoking gun. I knew it was there somewhere. My office was now almost empty. Most of my belongings were packed, ready for removal. I sat at my desk, a single forgotten research paper lying there. My handwriting, my equations. It was a draft from years ago before Adrian, a testament to my original work. They thought I was broken, that I was finished. A whisper escaped my lips. They don't know I'm forging a new weapon. I disappeared from the academic radar. My calls went unanswered, my emails ignored. They thought I was broken, retreating into despair. But I was simply moving into the shadows. My quiet home office became my war room, a place where I could work unseen, unheard. This was not a retreat, it was a tactical repositioning. I was preparing my counterattack. I began to systematically revisit everything, every single note, every email exchange with Adrian, every early draft of my theory. I cross-referenced each line, each equation against Adrian's published paper. It was a painstaking process, a forensic examination of my own intellectual history. I knew the truth was hidden in plain sight. If only I looked closely enough. Adrian's paper was a masterpiece of theft, but it wasn't flawless. I found subtle, almost imperceptible inconsistencies, a theoretical derivation that felt rushed, a data point that didn't quite align with the rest. These were not mistakes of a genius, but errors of adaptation. He had copied my work, but he hadn't truly understood every nuance. These tiny cracks were my first real proof. I started mapping out Adrian's network. The academic collaborators he suddenly acquired, the review board members who had vouched for his paper. It became clear he hadn't acted alone, or at least he had skillfully manipulated others. He had woven an intricate web, drawing influential people into his orbit, subtly implicating them in his grand deception. This was more than just theft, it was a conspiracy. Next, I delved into the personal and professional histories of Adrian's key supporters. Everyone has vulnerabilities, past indiscretions, or hidden ambitions. I researched their publications, their funding sources, their alliances. I needed to understand their motivations, their weaknesses. Knowledge was power, and I was gathering all I could. This was a chess game, and I needed to know every piece on the board. I began to build a shadow archive. Every original document, every dated draft, every email, every digital file containing my early thoughts on the theory. I digitally signed and timestamped each piece, creating an undeniable chain of custody. This was my true legacy, carefully preserved, irrefutable. It was the weapon I would eventually wield, forged in silence and solitude. There were moments, dark ones, when the sheer scale of the injustice threatened to overwhelm me. Frustration simmered, bordering on despair. But then the image of Adrian's triumphant smile, built on my ruin, would flash in my mind. The raw injustice fueled me, hardening my resolve. This wasn't just about my work, it was about truth, about reclaiming what was stolen. I would not break. I realized the true depth of Adrian's ambition. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of opportunism. This was a calculated, long-term plan, meticulously executed. He had been laying the groundwork for years, subtly positioning himself, preparing for the moment he could strike. He had not just stolen my magnum opus, he had orchestrated a systemic erasure of my existence from the scientific record. His ruthlessness was chilling. I began to map out Adrian's burgeoning empire, its funding sources, the key personnel he was hiring, his projected research directions. Every grant, every collaboration, every public statement. I looked for weak points, for dependencies, for anything that could be exploited. An empire built on a lie, no matter how grand, always has a foundation of sand. I just needed to find the right grain. Then, in an old, forgotten digital file buried deep within a version of my core theoretical framework, I found it, not a direct signature, but something far more ingenious. A coded message, a hidden timestamp embedded within the very data structure. An undeniable, irrefutable mark of my original authorship placed there years before Adrian's paper. Adrian, you left a thread, a very thin, almost invisible thread, and I'm going to pull it until your entire tapestry unravels. I began my calculated counterattack. Adrian had built his empire on my stolen work, but every grand structure has its weak points. I knew his methods, his shortcuts, his intellectual blind spots. My first move was to introduce doubt subtly, untraceably. I would not confront him directly yet. This was about infiltration, about planting seeds of suspicion where they would grow unseen. I started with the smallest, most innocuous details, things no one else would notice at first glance. This was a long game, and I was just placing the first piece. I anonymously leaked minor discrepancies, not major flaws, just tiny inconsistencies in Adrian's supporting data. I targeted obscure online forums, specialized preprint archives, and lesser-known academic journals. These were places Adrian's main circle wouldn't typically scrutinize. The goal was not immediate exposure, but quiet dissemination. A whisper here, a question there. Enough to make a few sharp minds working in the shadows start to wonder. The beauty of it was that it couldn't be traced back to me. It was simply information appearing in the ether. Next, I subtly manipulated academic grant review processes. I knew the system, its vulnerabilities, and the unspoken rules. Using my deep understanding of Adrian's adapted work, I crafted anonymous queries. These weren't accusations, but well-researched questions. They focused on the originality of his foundational claims, the robustness of certain methodologies, and the unique contributions of his ongoing projects. The questions were precise, designed to trigger deeper scrutiny without revealing my hand. I wanted the reviewers to do my work for me, to start digging on their own. I identified a junior researcher on Adrian's team. His name was Dr. Chen. He had published a few papers with Adrian, but his body language, his subtle online comments suggested private doubts about Adrian's ethics. He seemed to value truth above ambition. I began to subtly cultivate a relationship, not as Elias Vance, but as an anonymous mentor. I offered advice through encrypted channels, posing as a retired academic. I provided insights that would guide him unknowingly towards the cracks in Adrian's facade. I needed an inside man, and Dr. Chen was the perfect, unwitting pawn. My deep understanding of theoretical physics was my greatest weapon. I crafted highly specific, seemingly innocuous queries. These were not direct challenges to Adrian's core theory, but questions about its adapted proofs. Questions that, if truly investigated, would expose fundamental flaws. I sent these queries to a few trusted, independent researchers I knew. They were puzzles, intellectual challenges presented as academic curiosities. I knew their minds, their rigor. They would pursue these questions out of pure intellectual drive, unknowingly dismantling Adrian's work from the inside. I leveraged my old, forgotten connections. These were not the elite, well-funded academics, but independent researchers, fringe theorists, and retired professors who still held a deep love for pure science. They had no institutional loyalties, no reputations to protect. I disseminated alternative perspectives on Adrian's work through them. Not direct attacks, but nuanced discussions, raising questions about the source of certain ideas, the sudden breakthroughs. These were whispers in the dark corners of academia, designed to chip away at Adrian's narrative from the outside. The psychological chess match had begun. I anticipated Adrian's reactions. He was arrogant, but also cunning. He would dismiss early whispers, attribute them to professional jealousy, but as the doubts accumulated, he would start to feel the pressure. I enjoyed the unseen manipulation, the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was pulling the strings. Every anonymous query, every leaked discrepancy was a move on the board. He wouldn't know who his opponent was, or even that he was in a game. That was my advantage. My silent power. Then a small, seemingly unrelated academic scandal emerged. It involved one of Adrian's minor collaborators, a researcher who had verified some of his early foundational data. I had orchestrated it, a test of my methods, a minor data fabrication accusation just enough to cause a ripple but not a tsunami. It wasn't directly tied to Adrian's core theory, but it created a shadow of doubt around his network. It was a small crack, a proof of concept. The establishment would be forced to investigate, and that investigation might lead to other, more significant discoveries. A renewed sense of purpose surged through me, a dark satisfaction. My meticulously planned actions were beginning to yield results. They were small, almost imperceptible to the outside world, but I felt them. A quiet email from a journal editor asking for clarification on an anonymous query. A subtle shift in a grant review committee's language. These were not victories, not yet, but they were tremors. Each tremor confirmed my strategy. Adrian's empire built on sand would eventually crumble. I just needed to keep applying the pressure. I watched a news report one evening, a minor funding cut to one of Adrian's satellite projects. The report framed it as restructuring, but I knew better. It was a direct result of the subtle questions I had planted, the seeds of doubt I had sown. A subtle, almost imperceptible smile played on my lips. The foundation feels solid, Adrian, but every skyscraper starts with a single crack, and I was just getting started. The next tremor would be bigger, and it would be closer to home. I escalated my campaign. The minor discrepancies I had planted were now growing. I targeted Adrian's core published work. My deep knowledge of his adapted theories allowed me to find more significant anomalies. These were not just slight misalignments. These were fundamental inconsistencies in his derivations, subtle but critical. I packaged these findings into anonymous reports, meticulously crafted to pique the interest of specific oversight committees and rival research groups. The goal was to make them undeniable, to force a closer look. I knew where to hit him hardest. The whispers I had sown were now taking root. I started to hear echoes from the academic grapevine. There were quiet discussions about Adrian's methodology, hushed questions about certain novel aspects of his theory. These were no longer just fringe theories. These were anomalies that reputable minds were beginning to notice. I saw the comments in obscure forums, the subtle shifts in online discussions. My carefully placed queries were working. The doubt was spreading, a slow-acting poison in his well-oiled machine. It was precisely as I had planned. Then came the first real tremor. Internal inquiries were launched within institutions tied to Adrian's funding. I had made sure the anonymous tips were specific, pointing to potential ethical oversights in data handling, not direct accusations of fraud, but concerns about best practices. This was enough to trigger a formal review. I knew these institutions valued their reputations above all else. Any hint of impropriety, even if unproven, would force their hand. Adrian's financial lifeline was now under scrutiny. My former colleagues, once silent, were now emboldened. I heard stories of private conversations, of questions being raised behind closed doors. They weren't coming to me, not yet, but they were talking among themselves. Adrian's past behavior, his sudden rise, the origins of his research, these were now topics of quiet debate. My subtle prodding, the anonymous questions, had given them permission to voice their own underlying doubts. The network of trust Adrian had built was beginning to fray at the edges. It was time to introduce the ghosts. I orchestrated the discovery of overlooked historical documents. These were not my own papers, not directly. Instead, they were obscure, decades-old publications, forgotten patents, and theoretical notes from other researchers that hinted at concepts remarkably similar to Adrian's original breakthroughs. These documents had been buried, dismissed as fringe, but with my careful highlighting, they now seemed like critical precursors. They wouldn't prove Adrian stole my work, but they would prove his work wasn't as original as he claimed. It would sow deep seeds of doubt. Dr. Chen, my unwitting ally, became increasingly useful. His anonymous mentor was guiding him towards crucial internal data. He started sharing more significant, sensitive information. Details about Adrian's lab protocols, his data acquisition methods, even subtle pressures on junior researchers to adjust results. This wasn't just about theory anymore. This was about the very integrity of the data. His insights were invaluable, providing me with the precise leverage I needed to expose the rot from within. He was a good man, unknowingly helping me dismantle a lie. Adrian began to show cracks in his polished facade. I watched his public appearances. He dismissed the growing critiques with increasing agitation. His calm, confident demeanor was fraying. He spoke faster, his answers becoming more defensive, less precise. He was unaware of the puppet master pulling the strings, but he felt the pressure. The subtle attacks were getting to him. It was a satisfying sight. Seeing the man who had stolen my life's work squirm under the weight of his own deception. The fear was setting in. I used my knowledge of specific academic journals' peer review processes. I knew which editors valued rigorous, independent analysis. I crafted nuanced, critical analyses of Adrian's published work. These were not angry denunciations. They were calm, scholarly critiques, pointing out the newly highlighted inconsistencies and the rediscovered historical parallels. I ensured these analyses got published, not in major journals at first, but in respected niche publications. These were the subtle stabs designed to chip away at his credibility, one peer review at a time. The biggest blow landed when a major funding body placed a hold on a significant grant for Adrian's breakthrough research. The official reasons cited unresolved methodological concerns. This was a direct result of the internal inquiries, the quiet whispers, and the published critiques. Money was Adrian's lifeblood. Without it, his empire would starve. This wasn't just a setback, it was a wound to his very foundation. The news spread quickly through the academic community. The empire was truly beginning to tremble. I watched the televised interview. Adrian, visibly stressed, fumbled a question about a recent critique of his methodology. He tried to dismiss it, but his voice wavered. The confident facade was gone, replaced by a desperate, almost panicked energy. A surge of satisfaction coursed through me. The fear was setting in, wasn't it, old friend? Soon the masks will fall, and when they do, your entire world will crumble. The next move would be the one that exposed everything. I was ready. My weapon was forged, and the target was in sight. The moment had arrived. Years of meticulous planning, countless hours in the shadows, all led to this. I reviewed the final dossier one last time. It was a comprehensive narrative, irrefutable evidence of Adrian's plagiarism, data manipulation, and the systemic cover-up that had nearly erased me. I had chosen a major investigative news outlet known for its integrity and reach. This was not a whisper, this was a shout, designed to echo across the entire scientific community. There would be no denying the truth this time. With a calm breath, I pressed send. The digital package containing every piece of evidence, every timestamped document, every coded message was now in the hands of the press. It was devastatingly complete, meticulously cross-referenced, and undeniable. I had left no room for doubt, no crack for Adrian to exploit. The silence of my office after the click was profound. A calm before the storm. The first domino had fallen, and I knew the rest would follow swiftly. The news broke like a dam. Within hours, the reports were everywhere. Adrian's name, once synonymous with genius, was now linked to fraud and intellectual theft. His carefully constructed public image, built on a foundation of lies, collapsed dramatically. The scientific community reeled. I watched a live broadcast, seeing the shock on the faces of commentators and analysts. The world was finally seeing the man I knew, not the one he pretended to be. It was a profound, almost surreal moment of vindication. The retractions began almost immediately. Major scientific journals, one after another, issued formal statements. Adrian's seminal papers, the very core of his stolen empire, were being pulled, citing ethical violations and egregious fraud. It was a cascade, each retraction a hammer blow to his credibility. I had predicted this. Once the truth was out, the academic world, despite its initial complicity, would protect its own integrity. They had no choice but to dismantle his work piece by piece. Then came the official announcements regarding his accolades. Adrian's numerous awards, the symbols of his false triumph, were publicly questioned. Committees were formed, reviews initiated. Soon after, the first revocations were issued. Prizes, medals, honorary degrees, all stripped away. I watched as the very pedestal he had built on my stolen work shattered beneath him. It was a public humiliation, a systematic erasure of his fraudulent legacy, mirroring the erasure he had attempted to inflict upon me. The ripple effect spread through Adrian's network. His collaborators, those who had benefited from his stolen work or had simply turned a blind eye, now faced intense scrutiny. Some lost their positions, others saw their funding frozen. The institutions that had supported him were forced to conduct internal investigations. It was a chaotic dismantling, a necessary cleansing. I felt no pity for them. They had chosen their side, enabling a fraud, and now they were paying the price. The media frenzy was immense, a constant clamor for answers. I navigated it carefully, choosing my moments to speak. My calm, authoritative voice, devoid of anger or bitterness, added immense weight to the accusations. I presented the facts clearly and concisely, letting the evidence speak for itself. My words resonated, cutting through the noise, painting a stark picture of betrayal and intellectual theft. I was not seeking revenge, I stated. I was seeking truth, and that made my statements irrefutable. Adrian attempted a desperate counterattack. He tried to discredit the news outlets, to paint me as a disgruntled former mentor. He tried to rally his remaining allies, to launch a smear campaign. But my foresight had already neutralized all his potential avenues for defense. Every lie he told, every accusation he made was met with concrete evidence I had preemptively released. He was flailing, exposed, and utterly alone. His cunning had been replaced by panic, and I watched him unravel. As the dust began to settle, a profound mix of vindication and exhaustion washed over me. The fight had been long, arduous, and deeply personal. I had reclaimed my legacy, exposed the truth, and brought down an empire built on lies. But the cost had been immense. Years consumed by this single-minded pursuit, relationships strained, my own professional life derailed. The satisfaction was real, but it was tempered by a deep weariness, a realization of the personal toll this battle had exacted. Then came the final, crushing blow for Adrian. His Nobel Prize. The ultimate symbol of scientific achievement was officially put under review. His name, once whispered with reverence, was now synonymous with fraud. I watched the news report, expecting a surge of triumph, but an unexpected emptiness settled over me instead. This wasn't the end of the story, I realized. It was merely the beginning of something far more profound, a new chapter I hadn't yet considered. The fight was over, but the rebuilding, both personal and professional, had just begun. Adrian's fall was complete. The legal system, slow but relentless, had caught up. The verdict was swift. He faced severe consequences, a permanent ban from academic research, effectively ending his career. His empire, built on deceit, crumbled entirely. I felt no joy, only a quiet certainty that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. He was no longer a threat. The scientific community officially cleared my name. Decades after its initial conception, my original theory was finally recognized and lauded. The journals, once quick to dismiss me, now published retractions and apologies. My work, my true legacy, was restored. It was a strange feeling, seeing my name in headlines again, this time for the right reasons. The truth had found its way out. Accolades that should have been mine years ago began to pour in. Significant funding followed, allowing me to resume my research with newfound resources. Colleagues, once distant, now approached with renewed respect, some with genuine apologies. I reclaimed my place as a visionary in theoretical science. The professional ruin I had endured was slowly, meticulously undone. It was a quiet triumph. I dedicated myself to rebuilding my life and career. My focus shifted from revenge to something more profound, nurturing true scientific integrity. I championed ethical research practices, ensuring no other brilliant mind would suffer my fate. It was a new purpose, a way to transform my bitter experience into a positive force for the future of science. This was my true phoenix moment. My final confrontation with Adrian was not in a courtroom. It was a letter, brief and to the point. I detailed his downfall, not with malice, but with a stark clarity. I spoke of the brilliance he wasted, the trust he shattered. I ended it simply: "You tried to erase me, Adrian, but some truths once discovered can never truly be buried." No reply was needed. My words were his final sentence. I often reflected on the profound psychological toll of the betrayal. The years of fighting, the public humiliation, the gaslighting, it had left scars. But with vindication came a deep, quiet peace. The constant gnawing anxiety was gone. I had faced the darkness, fought through it, and emerged. The journey had been arduous, but worth every agonizing step. I was finally free. I returned to teaching, mentoring a new generation of students. I instilled in them not only scientific knowledge, but also the paramount importance of intellectual honesty and trust. I shared my story, not as a cautionary tale of victimhood, but as a testament to perseverance and the enduring power of truth. Their eager faces, full of potential, brought me immense satisfaction. The academic world, spurred by my case, implemented new safeguards against intellectual property theft. Stricter peer review processes, mandatory timestamping of research, and clearer guidelines for mentorship were put in place. It was a direct consequence of my fight, a systemic change born from my suffering. My legacy extended beyond my theory. It was now etched into the very ethics of science. I found renewed passion for research, no longer tainted by the past. My mind, once consumed by strategic planning for revenge, was now free to explore new frontiers. I embarked on new, truly original discoveries, building upon my foundational work. The joy of pure intellectual pursuit, unburdened by betrayal, was exhilarating. My scientific journey continued, stronger than ever. I stood before a new generation of students, my theory now fundamental to their studies. I looked at my own work, projected on the screen, now truly my own, untainted and celebrated. A genuine, peaceful smile spread across my face. They tried to erase me. But some truths, once discovered, can never truly be buried. They only wait to be unearthed again. My legacy was secure, my peace earned.